Well, hey, big weekend here. It's a big weekend for our church, big weekend for the church. Big weekend for our church because it is commitment weekend for the Beyond initiative that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So hopefully you brought your pledge card, your commitment card. If not, you can find them in the seats in front of you. We'll have a moment a little bit later in the service where we can honor God with those. But it's also a big weekend for the church because, of course, it is. Anybody? It's Palm Sunday. And by the way, if you're new to church and you're like, I did not know the answer to that question. And by the way, what the heck is Palm Sunday? It's a celebration of this weekend about 2,000 years ago when Jesus entered Jerusalem and the people came out to greet him, and they had palm branches, which in Israel was a symbol of celebration. So they laid the palm branches down to welcome Jesus into Jerusalem as king. And so a lot of times what churches do on Palm Sunday is they give little kids palm branches. Anybody grow up in church where you ever given a palm branch? Anybody have scars from the palm? Because here's the thing about, I know we do it because we want to help people get into the moment, and I think the idea is if we can get them into the scene, they'll have amazing insights. But the reality is a lot of times when you give small children things and say, wave these around, you get more injuries than insight, right? Because you can weaponize waving. There's no question about that, right? And so we're not doing that this weekend, but I do actually want to take a moment to try to put us in that place. I want us to try to go back and imagine the scene because it's a big day. And especially I want us to think about the disciples, the people who are coming behind Jesus. Because they've been working towards this for a long time. For them, Palm Sunday wasn't just a celebration, it was a culmination of everything they'd been hoping for and praying for and working towards. And they weren't quite sure how it was going to go, if I can be real, because they had a mixed sort of reception. I mean, there were a lot of people who loved Jesus, but honestly, the religious people didn't love Jesus. They had not spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, so they kind of knew in the, the more out of the city area how people responded to Jesus, but they weren't quite sure how much the religious leaders might have poisoned the people in Jerusalem, so they weren't quite sure what the reception was going to be, and so they're getting closer to Jerusalem, and they start seeing people kind of moving the wrong direction. People should have been going into the city because that was, it was a big day. Passover was coming, and so lots of people were coming from outside the city going into the city, but they saw a bunch of people coming out of the city. And probably their first reaction was, uh-oh, what is this? Is this a lynch mob? We're not quite sure what's going on. And then they realized that they weren't shouting in anger. They were actually shouting praise. They were shouting Hosanna, which means God save us. And they had these palm branches. That's a symbol of celebration. They were laying them down to get things ready for Jesus. So can you imagine how the disciples probably felt in this moment? Can you picture the disciples behind Jesus kind of realizing, going from fear to oh, yeah, well, this is going to be good. There's probably some big smiles. They're excited. There's probably some, honestly, I don't know if this is irreverent or not, but I think they probably were doing some fist pumping. Yes! Yes! Maybe some high-fiving. Right, they're having a good time. Can you picture it? Okay, now freeze that image in your mind. Okay, just lock a still image of that in your mind. Maybe Peter's mid-high five. And I probably should have done a sound effect for this, but I want to do kind of what they do in movies, where they kind of show you a future scene and then they back you up to the beginning of the story. So let's do a rewrite. Let's go. That's what the sound would have sounded like, right? And I want to leave the disciples and Jesus on the road into Jerusalem, and I want to go back to where Jesus found the disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, because I want to talk about the road to Palm Sunday. If you want to follow along, we're going to be in Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5. I want to talk to you about the road to Palm Sunday, because as exciting as the road they walked on Palm Sunday was, the road to Palm Sunday was even more exciting. For the disciples, it was a celebration, but it was also a culmination. And they had seen so much along the way, right? They had seen the lame walk. They had seen the blind open their eyes. They'd seen the mute open their mouths and sing praises. They'd seen the dead rise. I mean, they'd seen incredible things. As exciting as the road they walked on Palm Sunday was, it didn't even hold a candle, honestly, to the road they'd walked getting to Palm Sunday. It was an incredible journey they'd been on. But like every journey, it starts with a step. Like, you know that, right? Every journey starts with a step. And a lot of people have talked about that. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Mark Twain said, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. It's that first step. And the great philosopher Bilbo Baggins. Yeah, I'm a nerd. Great philosopher Bill Baggins says, it is a dangerous business taking that first step out of the front door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no telling where you might be swept off to. See, lots of people have talked about the importance of that first step, but what not nearly enough people talk about is how often the first step is a faith step. How often the first step is, it maybe is the beginning of a journey into something unbelievable, but it's also a first step, and it's a hard step because it's a faith step. It's a step into the unknown. And that was the case for the disciples. It says, one day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God, and he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon. And he asked him to put out a little bit from shore. And then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And this is one of my favorite passages. I've actually taught it many times over the years. But as I was reading it, getting ready for this message, I noticed something that I hadn't really paid any attention to, and that is that Luke draws attention to whose boat it was. There were 2 boats, but Luke very specifically says, the one belonging to Simon. He doesn't want us to miss that. And I thought, okay, well, why is that important, right? Because there were 2 boats, but Jesus didn't get into the other boat. He got into this boat, and it's not just that he got into this boat, he got into this person's boat, right? It's clearly not about, which boat, it's about whose boat. It's about Simon. And I don't think Jesus does anything arbitrarily. I think Jesus is the ultimate strategist. Everything is intentional. There's a reason for everything. And so the question that I find myself asking is, why Simon's boat? Why did he pick Simon? Which is actually a kind of an interesting question. Why did he pick Simon? Why does he pick anybody, right? Why does he pick Simon? And I've heard different people say things. I've heard pastors go, well, Jesus looked at Simon and he saw potential. He saw potential. I've heard people say he saw potential, other people saw problems. And there's probably some truth to the problems part of it. Simon was a mess. Can we just be honest? And I know he's one of the great apostles and all that, but Jesus didn't pick amazing people. People became amazing when Jesus picked them and they said yes, okay? So Simon's a mess. By the way, how many of us can just be real today and go, yeah, me too, I'm a mess? Go ahead and tell somebody you look like a mess. And then say, takes one to know one, all right? We're all a mess. It's good news that Simon's got problems, but a lot of people go, yeah, but Jesus looked at Simon and he saw the potential where other people see the problems, and I don't know that I buy that. I don't think I do. Because I don't think Jesus sees potential, I think Jesus creates potential. I don't think he's looking around going, I need some really good raw material to work with. No. Jesus can create the raw material if he needs to. Jesus doesn't see potential, he creates it. And by the way, I know this in my own life because if you had seen me when I was first following Jesus, back when I was a teenager, you would not have looked at me and gone, I see a preacher right there. And even if you had Jesus's eyes to see potential nobody else sees, I don't think you would have saw it. Seen it? Yeah. He wasn't there. I mean, what you would have seen and what was actually there was this really shy, kind of awkward, Hobbit quoting, science fiction reading. I was the kid that, if I was in the arcade, does anybody remember arcades? Yeah, okay. If I was in the arcade and I put a quarter, does anybody remember quarters? If I had a quarter in an arcade game and it didn't play, I was just going to leave. I wasn't going to go ask for my quarter back. I was just too shy, and you put me, and my worst nightmare was put me in front of a group of people in school and have to present a project. That was the absolute worst thing you could do to me. There was no potential. Jesus doesn't see potential, he creates it. So I don't buy that he picked Simon because he saw potential that nobody else saw. I don't believe that. I've also had people say, I think he picked Simon because he had a boat. He needed a boat, and Simon had a boat, and so, it wasn't so much that he saw potential as that he saw a possession that he was in need of. But does Jesus need our possessions? He does not. And think about this especially, right? Did Jesus need a boat? No, because some of us already know the story, and if you don't, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil it for you a little bit, but can I tell you something that Jesus can do? Jesus can walk on water. Jesus can walk on water, which means that he's got all these people, they're crowded around him, he's kind of backed up against the shore, and he's like, it's hard to teach in this kind of situation, I really need to get a little bit of space. And so Jesus could have absolutely been backed up and just kind of gone, and just stood on the water. And tell me that would not have improved his preaching. I know he was great. I know everybody was hanging on his every word. But if he was standing on water while he was preaching, that's impressive, right? Every eye, I mean, nobody's going anywhere. Like, he's locked in. His ministry is launched with incredible momentum, right? Jesus didn't need a boat. So I don't believe that it was that Jesus looked at Simon and saw potential. I don't believe that it was that he looked at Simon and saw possession. I think Jesus picked Simon because he had a plan. Jesus picked Simon because Jesus had a plan for Simon. By the way, if you don't know, this is the same man, this is the same Simon that Jesus eventually renamed. They named him Peter. In fact, this is Matthew. At a certain point in his ministry, Simon kind of got it. He understood who Jesus was, and he announced it in response to his proclamation of who Jesus was. Jesus said, "And I tell you that you are Peter. Your name's not Simon anymore. I'm going to give you a new name. Your name is Peter," and Peter in Greek means the rock. It says that I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Jesus said, I got plans. I got plans for all of you. It's all the disciples said, you're starting what I call the church. And the thing about this church, he said, is it's gonna storm the gates of death with the message of life. That's what Hades was. It was the realm of the dead. And the gates, they were to keep the dead in. But he says that the gates of Hades will not overcome it. The church is going to come against the gates. The church is the offensive player in this game. And the gates won't be able to withstand the church. They're going to bust through it, and they're going to take the message of life, the gospel, to those who are living separated from God for all of eternity. They're living in death, but they're going to be set free. I'm going to do this thing. And he looks at Simon, and he goes, and I'm going to start with you. I'm going to make you the cornerstone. And it's interesting because Jesus is the cornerstone, but he looks at Peter or just Simon. He says, and now I'm going to call you the rock, and you're going to be the cornerstone. I got plans for you, man. I got plans for you. And by the way, can I just tell you, I think this is something that Jesus does with all of us. Jesus looks at us and he doesn't go, I see some potential. He looks at us and he says, I've got a plan. I got a new name for you. In fact, I got a name for you that if I whispered it to you right now, you would say, there's no way that can be me. But it can be. And the question is, what does it take to become who Jesus wants to turn us into? What does it take to discover the plan? Well, what did it take for Simon? I think this is so interesting. Pay attention. Jesus, let me go back again. It says, he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him to put out a little from shore. Underline that word asked. He asked him. And by the way, if you're wondering, but what's in the original Greek? Well, the original Greek word, it's a great question. The original Greek word probably is best translated as asked. There's nothing tricky going on here. Didn't command, didn't insist, didn't require, he asked. He made a request. He got into the boat and he said, hey, Simon, would you work with me? Would you put out a little bit from shore? And think about this for a second. The man who could walk on water asked Peter if he could borrow his boat. Well, he asked Simon if he could borrow his boat. He wasn't Peter yet. And I think the first step on the long journey for Simon to become Peter was actually letting Jesus borrow the boat. Think about this. Simon's first step in becoming Peter was letting Jesus borrow his boat. Okay, let's do that. So they put out a little bit from shore. Now, when he finished speaking, he said to Simon, let's go further. He said, put out into deep water. Let's go farther away from the shore. Put out into deep water and let down the nets for catch. Can I just tell you something about saying yes to Jesus? Saying yes to taking that first step of faith. Following Jesus is always about your next step. There's always a next step. And his first step was, can I borrow your boat? His next step was, hey, now let's go a little farther out and let's put down nets. And yeah, people are still watching, right? Let's do this in the sight of all the people. There's always a next step. Do you know that? How many of us have been walking with you? We've been following Jesus for more than 5 minutes. Come on. All right. How about more than 5 years? Nice. More than 50 years. Some hands. Love it. So I don't know why if you've been walking with Jesus more than 50 years, I don't know why you're here. Like, you got it all figured out, don't you? Like, you're completely surrendered. Every aspect of your life has been brought into, alignment with the will of God, and you're completely holy and perfect and pure, and everything is surrendered, right? No? Of course not. Because following Jesus is always about your next step. There's always a next step. Doesn't matter how long you've been walking, right? That's why when we talk about generosity, we say, if you're not giving anything, your next step is to give something. And if you're giving something, your next step is start giving something consistent, a percentage. And if you're giving something consistent, your next step is to give a tithe, the first 10% to your place of worship. And if you're giving a tithe, there's still a next step. My wife and I have been tithing for years. By the way, we didn't start that way. We started, our first step was to go from nothing to something. And I'm going to have to be honest and admit it, I was already in ministry. I was like, but I'm exempted from that, right? Because I get it paid from other people's donations. Doesn't make sense for me to give. And then God spoke and said, no, you need to give too, because it's not about what I need from you. It's about what I need for you. It's about what I want to do in your life, and you need to surrender this. And so we went from nothing to something, and something to something consistent, and then something consistent to tithe. And now we're in what we call spirit-led generosity, where we tithe to our local church. But then we're always asking God, what's our next step? Is it another compassion kid to sponsor? Is it another missionary to be part of? Is it another project like Beyond to contribute to for the next couple of years? We're always asking for the next step. There's always a next step. Always a next step. So the question that you want to be asking yourself today is just this: what's your next step? Because there is nobody who walked in here today who doesn't have a next step. For Simon, the first step was just put out a little bit. Just test the waters. Let me sit here. The next step was, let's put out into deep waters and let's put down the nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night, and we haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. Can I just tell you how much I love Simon? I think I like him so much because I see so much of myself in him. Not the potential, the problems. I love that the rock on which Jesus is going to build the church does the same thing that I find myself doing all the time, and I bet you do too. And that is, he obeyed, but he also objected. Did you see that? Like, he obeyed. Yeah, because you say so, I'll put down the nets. But he also objected. Hey, Master, I just want you to let you know, this is a dumb idea. It's not a good idea. We're going to look stupid. It's not going to work. We've been out here all night. This part of the Sea of Galilee, it gets really hot, and so the fish during the day, they go into the much deeper parts of the lake, and they go farther down. We fish at night for a reason, Jesus. The night it gets cool, and they'll come up to the surface, especially if we put lamps out, then we'll get them a little bit closer up, and then we can scoop up a few with our nets. But in the day, they go deeper, and they move to other parts of the lake. And we were here all night. I got to tell you something, Jesus, there's no fish. They weren't all night. I guarantee you there's no fish now. Anybody ever done this? God said, I need you to obey, and you said, yeah, but I need to object first. Anybody ever done this? I get this every day at my house because I have huskies. And this is what they do. I don't know if you know this about huskies, but they are objectors. They do. I mean, every time I tell them something, I'm like, hey, sit. And I get this. There's obedience, but there's always an objection first. And anybody know what that's like? Anybody say, yeah, that's me, right? I mean, how often do we do this, right? God, I know that you want me to forgive them, but they don't deserve that. God, I know that I need to ask them for forgiveness, but they did deserve what I did to them. They had it coming. God, I know you want me to serve, but I wouldn't be any good at it. God, I know you want me to connect in community. I know you want me to go back to that life group, but those people are so weird. Did you see them? God, I know you want me to give, but what I'm able to give isn't going to make any difference, so what's the point? And here's the interesting thing. Simon objected, but then he obeyed. And I think the order is important. He lodged his objection first. We've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything. This doesn't make any sense. But then he obeyed. He did the objection first. He lodged his objection, but then he pledged his obedience. And I think that matters. I don't know if you know this about the human brain, but there's an interesting thing about the way God's wired our brains. What comes last matters most. Our brains just interpret what comes last as the most important thing. I mean, you can think about it like this. Imagine you go to a restaurant and it's the best meal you've ever had. And it's the best service you've ever had. And it's the best ambient. Everything about it's perfect. And then at the very end, right as you're about to walk out, they give you the bill, but they overcharged you for some things. And they won't change the bill. Are you going back? No. Because what comes last matters most. Our brains are just kind of hardwired that way. And it's true, actually, it's like a brain hack, actually, even when we think about obedience. And so it's interesting, Simon, he lodges his objection, but that's not the last thing. He lodges his objection, but then he pledges his obedience. He flips the script. See, a lot of times I think what happens is we recognize the obedience. We go, okay, I know I will, I should, or but. And then our brains love big buts. They do. I cannot lie. I just can't, right? We love them. And then we take them, and our brains are like, that's the big thing, right? And that's what we remember, and that's what we focus on. And so here's what we need to do. We actually need to follow Simon's instruction, and we need to flip the script, okay? Flip the script. Literally just reverse the order. Go, God, they don't deserve my forgiveness. Did you see what they did to me? But I know that I don't deserve it, and I'm called to forgive others like you forgave me, so they don't deserve it, but I'm going to obey. God, I only said what I said because of what they did to me. I only hurt them because of how they hurt me. They don't deserve an apology from me. They deserve exactly what I gave them. But I know that relationship matters, and I need to apologize for what I said. Flip the script. God, I don't think I'm going to be good at serving. You mean to serve in kids ministry? I don't even like children. They smell funny and they're sticky, and I'm not going to be any good at it. But boy, I know raising up the next generation matters, and I need to be generous with my time. Flip the script. God, you saw those people last Thursday night at the life group, right? They were so weird. And I was so awkward, but I know I need community, so I'm gonna go back. God, I don't feel like I can give enough to make any kind of a difference, but I know it's not about what I can give. I heard the message about the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes last week. It's not about how far it can go, it's about whose hands it's in. So I'm gonna give what I can. Flip the script. And I wonder today, where is God calling you to flip the script in your life? Where in your life right now is God calling you to obedience? And maybe you've got it backwards, like, I know that's what I should do, but, and here's the objection, and God says, okay, I just need you to flip the script right now. See what difference it makes. If you lodge your objection, I can handle it, God says. I understand you have an objection. I already know about it. Feel free to speak it. That's fine. But let's change the but. Let's make the but about obedience. And let's see what happens in your life, and let's see how much farther down the road to becoming who I created you to be we get. Now, when they'd done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. And so they signaled their partners on the other boat to come and to help them, and they came, and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And I love that. I mean, I love it. There's several things there that I love. One of them is that everybody else was blessed because of Simon's obedience. Our obedience isn't just a blessing for us. It spills out. That's how blessings work. God blesses us, and it pours out of us, and it blesses others. Everybody else got to partake in this incredible blessing. I love that about it. I also love the fact that it happened at all. Because if you think about it for a second, with Simon's attitude, Jesus could have easily gone, you know what? I was going to do something amazing. But since you felt like you had to lodge your objection, you know what? Never mind. That could have happened, but it didn't happen. Because in spite of the objection, what mattered most was the obedience. And this is so important to understand. Listen to me. The blessing is in the obedience. The blessing is in the obedience. Sometimes we're like, well, God wouldn't want me to do that because I don't have the best attitude about it. God wouldn't want me to take that action because I'm not coming at it from exactly the right heart. But listen, the blessing is in the obedience. And we know this from everyday life, don't we? You do not have to want to go to the gym to get the benefit of going to the gym. You do not have to want to eat healthy to get the benefit of eating healthy. You do not have to want to go to church to get the benefit of being in church. You don't have to want to give to get the benefit of giving, practicing generosity. The blessing is in the obedience. Now, is there maybe a greater blessing that comes when we're able to enter into it with the right heart? Probably simply because it allows us to enter into the obedience more frequently. I think about 2 Corinthians 9:6. Paul says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. There's a reward for the action. There's no mention of attitude there, okay? But he says, each of you should give what you have decided in your hearts to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. It's not that the attitude doesn't matter. The blessing is in the obedience, but there is a greater blessing. I think it's usually a greater blessing of joy and of peace and of progress in our faith when we're able to bring the obedience with the right heart attitude. But make no mistake about it, the blessing is in the obedience. It's in the obedience. And so Jesus blesses them, and they fill both boats so full that they were beginning to sink. Can you see that? Can you imagine, Peter just kind of grumbling like, this is dumb. There's no fish here. Sure, whatever, and lets the nets out and reaches and starts to pull them in. And hang on a second. I think I might be caught on something. And he's straining, and the muscles in his arms are popping, and the sweat's beating up, and he's hauling just inch by inch, and then the water starts to get kind of frothy, and you realize, oh, it's tails. There's so many fish that are flipping and flopping around, and he realized, I can't even get all these fish in. And so the other guys come over with their boat, right, the one Jesus didn't get into. They bring their boat, and both boats are so full of fish that it says they're beginning to sink. Yeah, he objected, but he obeyed, and the blessing was in the obedience. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees. And by the way, if you think about this, they're already up to their knees in fish, so Simon is now up to his neck in fish. By the way, notice when Simon Peter saw this. This is Luke kind of hinting at what we know to be true, that later on Simon's going to become Peter. And Luke hints at that's who this is, because that's what's in the process of happening. Simon is now on his journey to becoming Peter, because he's taken a step, and then another step, and then another step. He let Jesus borrow his boat. Now Jesus has filled the boat. And Simon Peter saw this. He fell at Jesus' knees and he said, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." And I love that about Simon too. Because he thinks that somebody like Jesus wouldn't want anything to do with someone like him. And I think there are days that I struggle with that. Maybe they are for you too. There are days that we look at not so much how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. And how many mistakes and failures and falls there are along the way. And we go, God, I don't know why you'd want anything to do with me. See, what Simon doesn't know yet is that people who know that they're sinful are his favorite kind of people. Because they're the people he came for. Just right before this, Jesus had announced, listen, I didn't come to call the righteous, but the sick, the sinful. I came to set the captives free. And here's the thing about Jesus, and I hope you know this. The only people Jesus can't set free are those who don't know they're enslaved. Those who can't recognize the chains, who can't recognize the sin, and therefore cannot bring it to the point of looking at him and going, I need you. And I don't know why you'd want anything to do with me, but if you do, set me free. Only people Jesus can't set free are the ones that can't admit that they're enslaved. You know, Jesus loved hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. He didn't love hanging out with religious people, which if that doesn't make us all a little bit nervous, you probably should. Because sometimes what happens in religion is we're like, well, I've got this thing figured out. I'm pretty good at this, at least on the outside, looking like I got it all together. Jesus hangs out with people that can go like, Simon, I'm a sinful man. And by the way, if you're here today and you're like, I can identify, I'm sinful. But can I just tell you, Jesus wants to set you free. And you're here today because Jesus is here meeting with you right now to set you free. He came, he died, he paid the price for all of our sin. He rose from the dead 3 days later, and he offers us forgiveness by faith. So listen, if you're here today and you've never said yes to Jesus, but you can say with Simon, I'm a sinful person, then tell him right now. Tell him, hey, Jesus, I've sinned. I'm sorry. Thank you for dying for me. I believe you rose from the dead, and I'm ready to follow you. That's your first step. And by the way, if you're making that decision today, would you let me know? I love praying for the people who make those decisions every week. And you can let me know, just text the word Jesus to 80875. Let me know you've made that decision. That's the first step on becoming everything that God's created you to be. You can't even imagine it right now, but it's going to be amazing. Simon Peter saw this. He fell at Jesus' knees and he said, go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. For he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And I love this. They spent all night fishing and they had nothing. And understand, they're fishermen. This is what they count on, right? This is what they depend on. And now the boat's so full, Jesus has blessed them with the very thing that they've spent their whole lives counting on, but they weren't able to produce. And so they're looking at this, they're just blown away by this. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. You think they had any idea what that meant? Not a chance. It's a weird thing to say, actually, if you think about it. I mean, they just hauled fish up in nets. He's like, well, now we're going to catch people. They're like, with the same nets or different nets? What? I mean, and we spiritualize it in the church, and we're like, yeah, it's evangelism. And that's true, but they had no idea what evangelism was. They had no idea what sharing the good news of Jesus was. They had no idea. And so he offers them something, and I guarantee you they did not know what it meant. But here's what I think is interesting. It was more than they were counting on. Somebody like Jesus wanted to hang out with them, and even though they didn't know exactly what they meant, they knew it was more than they'd been counting on. They'd been counting on a life of occasionally getting a decent haul and maybe making a little extra money, but most days just getting enough fish to eat, going out day after day after day, maybe being good husbands, maybe being good fathers. Those are important things. At the end of the day, looking back and go, I caught a bunch of fish, and I was a good person. And Jesus says, no, I got more for you. I've got meaning and significance beyond what you can imagine. No, you don't know what it's like yet, but this is what Jesus does. Jesus offers so much more than we were counting on. By the way, if you're a follower of Jesus and you've experienced more than you were counting on before you found Jesus, can we just thank him for that? Yeah. He offers us so much more than we've been counting on. And then the question is, how do you experience it? How do you take hold of it? How do you start the journey? And so they pulled their boats up on shore. They left everything, and they followed him. Isn't it interesting how the story starts and ends with a boat? Jesus said to Simon, can I borrow your boat? The man who can walk on water asked to borrow a boat. And then at the end, they left everything, and they left their boats on shore. And by the way, it's interesting, Jesus did about 85% of his ministry in this area, around the shore. And so they actually used those boats all the time. It wasn't so much that they gave the boats up as that they gave them over. They put them in Jesus' hands. They let him borrow them. And then they became the means by which Jesus took the word to all these different villages around the Sea of Galilee. But again, he didn't need that. He could walk on water. He could have walked to all those villages. And if he walked on the water into the villages, captive audience, right? And I think it's so interesting that the fishermen had to give their boats over to Jesus. Because the thing is, Jesus offers us more than we've been counting on when we offer him what we've been counting on. You see that? These things we've been like, that's my security, that's my safety, that's what I need. He says, I'm going to give you so much more than you ever imagined. I'm going to give you so much more than what you were counting on, but I need you to trust me with what you've been counting on. And the bottom line, Jesus doesn't need our boats, but we need to let him borrow them. Amen? It's not what he needs from us. It's what he wants for us. Hey, God, I just pray you'd speak to us in this moment. You've gifted all of us with boats. Things that we're tempted to count on. It might be money, it might be a talent, it might be an ability, it might be an education, it might be a relationship, it might be a possession. And we're counting on them. We need to count on you. So we need to let you borrow the boat. Just pray your Holy Spirit would speak in this moment. Speak to each heart. Let them hear clearly, because I love you. I want you to let me borrow your boat. I'm going to do things with it. I'm going to do things in your life that otherwise you'd miss out on. Holy Spirit, speak. Amen.